Hello, and welcome to the Godless Moms podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about co-parenting with religious parents. So, like when the custodial parent is religious, which means the kids spend the majority of their time with the religious parent and not the atheist parent. How do you cope with that situation? It's a complicated situation. But first, I think that we might address some things that happened in Dallas yesterday because it's just blowing my mind. But before we do that, this is my lovely co-host, Janice, and you can follow her on Twitter at wise_counselor and at divorce. And you also should go and sign up for her religious trauma workshop or divorcing religion workshop, which deals with leaving religion behind and the struggles that are associated with that. And that is at the URL that I am going to show right now. Where is it? There it is. So go to that URL and you can sign up for her workshop. Did you want to tell them a little bit about that workshop, Janice?
I sure do. Thank you. I say hello, and I've got Steve the cat here on my lap, and we're joining everybody from Kelowna, which is also the unceded territory of the Seal people in the Okanagan Valley. And yeah, my workshop, Divorcing Religion Workshop, is coming up this Sunday, and it runs for 6 consecutive Sundays. From 10 in the morning until noon PST. That's like church time. And it's for people who are recovering from religion and who want to talk about what that looks like for them. It's a great way to meet some other people in a small group setting and be able to understand each other and some of the trauma that goes along with having been a devout religious person or growing up in a religious household. So yeah, it's always a good time. So you can go to the website and sign up there. And I have to say, like watching all that crazy stuff that was going on in Dallas yesterday. So in case you aren't quite up to speed, the QAnon folk were told or left a Q drop or whatever, Q-tip, whatever it is, that JFK Jr. was going to show up in Dallas and that he was going to announce that he's running with Donald Trump for the next presidency. And hundreds of people showed up because they really thought this was really going to be a thing. And the only way it makes any sense at all to me is if a person already believes in resurrection, they already believe Jesus resurrected and Lazarus resurrected. What's more, one more resurrection? Like, it's already, you're already putting reality on hold and choosing fantasy over reality. So yeah, anything can happen.
Yeah, it's important to note that JFK Jr. died in a plane crash in 1999, and it's like for some reason I'm seeing people on Twitter talking about like they don't know that, like they don't know that he's dead, but he is very much dead.
Yeah.
It was confirmed his ashes were spread at sea, I believe, and it's very difficult to reanimate someone after that's been done. So. I mean, not that I know, I've not tried.
Wow.
But I can imagine that collecting all those ashes from the ocean and trying to put it back together would be a feat.
Mm-hmm.
But I cannot believe that I cannot wrap I keep thinking about it. It keeps popping into my head. There was a picture that I shared on Twitter of a guy with a sign or a flag that said Trump JFK Jr. 2020. So apparently they've been expecting this for a while. And they actually believe, some of the versions of the story were saying that JFK as well was going to show up because, if JFK was actually really alive, he'd be a Trump supporter, right?
Oh my God. Yeah. The whole thing is so, it's so mind blowing. And really it does speak to the fact that once we allow for the willing suspension of disbelief, we can believe anything. We become extremely vulnerable.
Yeah.
So we need to really be careful about the things that we support and endorse and believe in. We need to do our research from reputable sources, not from some ding dong who doesn't actually know it, but sounds convincing.
Yeah, I know. I just can't process it. Like the
Have
fact
you
that
read anything about today? Like how are they? What are the people saying? Who?
I
Oh, it didn't show up.
I have tried, and the story morphed, I believe, in some circles. It morphed from they were going to show up at Dealey Plaza, which in itself too is so like it just lacks taste and tact, because that's where his father was murdered. And like, why would he choose there
Mhm.
to reappear? I guess
Mm.
if his dad was going to be with him, then it erases all sadness from that spot or something
It
like
would
that.
be
But
very triumphant.
yeah, I mean, had he survived, would he even still be alive today anyways? But it morphed when JFK Jr. didn't show up at Dealey Plaza. It morphed into he's gonna appear on stage at the Rolling Stones concert. It just shifts. It's like the Jehovah's Witnesses and their end of days theories,
Yes.
like when things are gonna the apocalypse, when that's gonna
Yes.
happen. It shifts, and it shifts a million times, and it just morphs into something new, and they just follow that. And there's absolutely zero critical thought going on, and I don't
Mhm.
honestly have no idea what is going on in our world right now. I
Yeah,
cannot wrap my mind around it.
it's all emotion. There's not thinking that's really involved. Fantasy feels infinitely more comforting than reality. The reality is we live in a very random situation. There's a lot of chaos. I mean, some things we know, yeah, if you do A, it's likely going to result in B. Sometimes you do A, B, and C, and everything's right. You're doing it all the way it's supposed to. And then a terrible, tragic outcome happens. And we as humans really want an explanation for that. We feel safer when we can
Mhm.
explain something. And we're living in such a chaotic time. People are desperate for some sense of security and certainty and order.
Yeah.
And so that's why prophecies and Q-tips or whatever they're called, these sorts of things come up and make people feel safe and make them feel like they're in the know. They have a secret knowledge that the rest of us don't have.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. And I've always had this, just because we've had the experience with my parents being sucked in at one point in
Mm.
time, and um just with my experience with that, I see it as related to control and a fear of death. And like the whole coronavirus pandemic is it's really hard for some people to accept that it's real, because that means that we live in an environment that is hostile towards human life, and that at any point in time something new could threaten our lives, and that our existence here is fragile. And they don't like that. They don't like that. If they believe in their minds that some human created this, then humans are in control of it. and
Mhm.
and it's something we can defeat, and it's blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
And I believe that it definitely comes from that it's people are terrified to be living in a universe that doesn't give a shit if we're alive or not. Like, it
Yeah.
just doesn't.
Yeah.
And
And this also goes along with the idea that religious people have uh, that prayer is their personal magic wand.
mm,
Like the people proclaim in the name of Jesus, blah blah blah. Well, that's the adult equivalent of bibbity bobbity boo.
yeah.
Cinderella's godmother saying bibbity bobbity boo. Here you go. But when we're in that, when we're trapped in that mindset, particularly if we grew up in it, and also when I think of a lot of people coming out of, oh, there goes Steve. Go, Steve.
Aw.
A lot of people coming from very challenging backgrounds, socioeconomically or however else, then religion offers such a beautiful promise that it doesn't matter how poor or how awful things are for you in this life, you're going to have a beautiful afterlife and everything will be wonderful. That's a pretty enticing fantasy when things here are really difficult and, quite frankly, suck a lot of the time. It's hard to, reality can seem a bitter pill.
Yeah. I also think it comes down to boredom too, and that's why you see it a lot more in first world countries or developed countries, because people who are in developing countries are working. They don't have time to sit around and
Yes.
wait for the next cue drop, um they have way more to deal with, whereas here we live with an immense amount of privilege, and that affords us downtime, and then we have the
Yeah.
internet in our faces 24/7, and you
Mm.
can get caught up in stuff like that. But it's just like it's really difficult to just see like a grown man or woman who is like carrying a sign that says Trump JFK Jr., like unironically. It's not a joke,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
they've spent money on this. They've
Hmm.
spent money on this. They've taken the day off work to go to Dealey Plaza
Hmm.
because JFK Jr. is going to show up. I'm just
So much of it also has to do, as same with anti-vax group, any conspiracy theory type deal. The need for community and acceptance is undeniable. It is so strong in
Mhm.
humans, and so for many people, being accepted by the Q community or whatever they call it, it might be actually the first time in their life that they have ever felt that kind of uh, acceptance. I mean, church people generally have already felt it because they have their church community. But for a lot of young people who now have grown up without, any religious involvement or whatever, they've never really had that kind of group acceptance. And it's like a drug, it feels pretty good.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see if anybody kind of wakes up after this one, because a few people did after the
Yeah.
January 20th, the
Hmm.
inauguration,
Hmm.
and it'll be interesting to see if a few people are like, okay, I give up. None of this is true after this JFK debacle, but
And would they be willing to speak out? So, of course, we see with folks who have previously rejected belief in COVID, or they've been anti-vax and now they've lost their partner, or they've come through it and barely survived it themselves, and lots of them are saying, oh my god, this is a true thing, please, you need to get vaccinated. But lots of people also, I think, are not saying anything. They're just quietly getting vaccinated because they need it in order to enjoy the type of life that they had before.
yeah,
So
I think it was in New York, where it was like an estimate of 10,000 police officers were saying that they were not going to get vaccinated per the vaccine mandate, and then the deadline came and only 34 ended up going on paid leave.
is that so? Out of 10,000?
Yeah.
Yeah, I see. Simon has a good point. He says the idea of special knowledge is very attractive to people who are already distrustful of governments and other forms of authority, like scientists. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's part of it all for sure. And we are in an age where there is a lot of distrust for
Yeah.
the government. Unfortunately, a growing distrust of science and the medical community, and that's what's really wreaking havoc um, here. And those are the
Mhm.
ones that we really depend on.
Yeah, it's funny because whenever I'm arguing with somebody online about science and how like even they'll say even scientists can be biased and stuff like that, I'll always turn around and ask them and be like, would you agree that maybe we need some kind of a system or maybe even a method that strips bias from knowledge? And they're like, yeah.
Well, have I got a deal for you?
Okay, cue craziness aside. Now we have to talk about co-parenting with religious parents, which is probably, we both agreed before we started this how frustrating this topic is, because there is no good solution, really. It just kind of, it's always going to depend on your own situation. But you co-parent with somebody who's religious, so why don't you give the start?
Well, I'm happy to say now that my co-parenting is all done, my kids are grown and in their 20s, and I'm even happier to say that my former partner has now left religion as well.
Oh, really?
But it's a very painful issue, and whether the two of you are secular when you marry and one becomes religious, or you're both religious when you marry and then one leaves the faith, uh, either way, the dynamic shifts to such a significant degree. It can be very, very hard to remain together, to stay married, or in partnership at that point. And having kids adds to the drama in that mix, especially because religious parents, and I was deeply religious, tend to be much more rigid and authoritarian in how they parent, in the demand for obedience. Obedience is the first time, every time. That's the way I parented my children. That's the way I was parented. So not a lot of flexibility, not a lot of concern for the child as they're developing and their own temperaments, and a tendency to see kids pushing boundaries as extremely negative, rather than, hey, my kid's to the point that they're trying to exert some autonomy, and that actually on some level that's to be celebrated. It means they're healthy.
Mm-hmm.
Means they're growing and developing. So when that parenting, those ideals come into conflict, it makes things way, way harder. And so a lot of time the parents do end up splitting, but they still have this co-parenting that needs to be done, and it's a tall order.
Yeah. And I've had like so many people over the years email me and ask me like, how would you deal with it if you were co-parenting with an ex who was super religious and they had custody? And so the child is essentially being raised religious, and then they come to you like once every 2 weekends or something like that, or maybe you get them every weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the only window of time you have with them to kind of counteract that. And the thing that I always start with, and this is, I know we have the little banner on the bottom, but again, this is just my opinion, and your situation is going to depend on you and your ex. But I always suggest, like, first and foremost, to support your child and let your child lead, because the worst thing that can happen is for you to alienate your kid by being too pushy about, oh, religion is bullshit or whatever. So that's the first thing I would do, is always like be in tune with what your child wants and how your child feels. Because if your child starts to be like, if he's religious, he or she is religious, and it starts to mean a lot to them, pushing and prodding and trying to get them to break away from that is just going to alienate them. It's just going to make them upset. So you have to be really in tune with your kids.
Yeah, and the difficult and unfortunate part comes in when the still religious parent, depending how religious they are, may feel utterly threatened. Your deconversion is the worst thing that could ever happen, in their opinion. Now they're actually concerned that the devil has got you and you are going to hell, and you are actively going to be trying to drag their children to hell. So it's not thinking from a logical mindset. It's completely fear driven. And so this can create a big problem in co-parenting. If I had it to do over again, logic and reason and critical thinking would be the things that would be really encouraged and modeled in our home. That's not the way it was. And so if the kids are living with the more religious parent now, they might actually be hearing a lot of, well, daddy's going to hell or mommy's going to hell, or you mustn't listen to them, or there's just going to be more fear involved in the parenting. So
Mhm.
the non-believing parent, to the best of their ability, keeping calm, keeping kind, and really encouraging critical thinking from the most loving and curious point possible. The younger we start, the easier, the easier it can be. It's pretty hard to just directly introduce that when a kid is a teenager. They maybe already have boundaries up psychologically. Oh, it
Don't
looks
worry,
like
I
we
blocked
got
I
it.
blocked that
Okay,
person.
thank you. Okay, oh,
For the
special.
face people on
Thank you.
Facebook, there was, an interesting person in the chat on YouTube.
Not welcome here.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so it's definitely hard to do that that parenting. And of course, yeah, there can also be issues with religious extended relatives, aunts, uncles, grandparents in particular, who also are, if they're so entrenched in religion, that they just have this fear that
Mhm.
the kids are going to hell and they have to protect them at all costs. Boundaries become really important. Some countries have parental alienation laws. I think Canada actually might be one. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know. You have to do the research on your own. But in those countries, it's not allowed for one parent to be completely ragging on the other parent and trying to drive a wedge between the child
Mhm.
and parent.
There are also some places in the world, and a lot of those places are states in the South,
Mhm.
where you can actually lose custody or partial custody of your children because you're an atheist. It's happened
Wow,
before. I've had lots of
that is
people, like,
horrifying.
and it's, well, it's not necessarily because they're an atheist. Like, what usually unfolds is that it's in court, it's made out to be, like, the religious parent is made out to be the more fit parent because they take them to church, and taking them to church is part of
Yeah.
raising a happy,
Morality.
healthy child.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
and if
Well,
you're not
yeah.
doing that, you're not a fit parent, and so
Mhm.
that's how they play it out in court, and then the atheist parent loses custody, or some of their custody, or some of their time, or even unsupervised visits, and it's, yeah, it's pretty awful, and it's still happens. They still, I don't know if they actually rule against atheist parents anymore in some of those states, but I know it's still difficult for them in court, especially when it, like, if it comes out that they're an atheist and that becomes a topic, it's like all of a sudden everybody's judging them and their morality and their ability to raise a child, which is ridiculous. And I just can't believe it's 2021 and that still happens. But
Well, and I mean, if the evangelicals get their way, and the United States becomes a theocracy of sorts, then, we can expect to see more of that. So definitely, parenting from a gentle point of view and a caring point of view uh, is better than doing it from the authoritarian point of view. If your kid is 13 and they're like, I want to go to youth group, and you say, you're never allowed to go to youth group. Well, then guess what becomes super appealing is, I want to go to youth group. Much
yeah.
better to talk with them about why they want to go and what they think happens there. And, oh, here's some interesting psychological things. Pay attention and tell me, do you see any of these going on? Because I know that there's mystical manipulation that takes place.
Mhm.
And um, yeah, encouraging curiosity um, rather than being authoritarian.
I know, as atheists, we all know, though, that religion doesn't stand up to any kind of scrutiny, right? Like, when you start asking the right questions, it doesn't, and you don't have to do it. Like, you don't have to confront your kids about whether or not this is real or that's real, or nope, you don't have to make accusations about their priest or their pastor or something like that. Oh, he's lying to you or something like that. In all you have to do is, they've been to church that day, you pick them up, you're having lunch with them, you just be like, "What did they say in church? I'm interested." And they tell you, ask questions about it. "Well, that doesn't make sense to me. How come this and that?" And, like, just they'll pretend like they know the answer, or they'll shrug it off or whatever, but you're starting that seed of doubt. And they walk away and they're still thinking about that question that you asked them.
Mhm.
And I think that's one of the best ways to counter that without triggering the defensiveness in the
Yeah.
child.
Yeah.
Um,
Watch TV shows about cults. Watch TV shows about myths and mythology and religion and um, just as doors, like you say, conversation starters. You're planting seeds. You're getting them to think.
yeah. And that's a good point, is watching shows. So one of the shows that I think is a really great show, and it's really entertaining for all kids, of course, is Cosmos. And kids love that show. Like, my son used to get up in the morning and watch it without being prompted. I'd come out of our bedroom and he'd be watching it already.
Mm.
Um, and then also talking about all different kinds of religions. So be like, just at the dinner table, be like, did you know that the people of Nicaragua believe such and such? Or, like, just in casual conversation. So you're not comparing it to their religion. You're not threatening their beliefs or their religion in any way. You're just saying, oh, other people believe this, and other people believe
Mhm.
this, and other people believe this. And
Mhm.
the other thing that is important to note, and to help your anxiety levels with this, because I know it's probably causes anxiety in some parents, is that they're living in the information age. They're living in the age of the internet. And the most of the people who I have met through what I do here, who used to be religious and are now atheist, are that way because of stuff that they found on the internet. So they're all like, their religion is already at a disadvantage.
Mhm. Mhm. And let's remember too, if a divorce has taken place already, okay, the kid, that's a lot of adjusting to do. Then the child
Yeah.
is going to be living, if they're living more often with the religious parent, and less often with you, and so there's all sorts of emotions around that. And frankly, religious parents, yes, they can be very loving, but children know that there are conditions around that love. So anytime if a parent is talking about, you better not sin, Jesus hates it when you sin, this sort of thing, the child is learning that, oh, well, if I, mommy's or daddy, whoever isn't going to love me, there's fear there. They're worried about that. So we want to just make sure that we're always very loving with our children and having some kind of understanding of emotionally where they're coming from.
Yeah, exactly. Just like, I think that's perfect, because I think that the number one thing that you want to avoid is them feeling like you're attacking them in any way, or their other parent.
Mm.
I say mother because usually it's the mother who has custody.
Yeah.
Um,
And it's also often the mother that's very religious.
mhm. And it's important, like, not to ever. I'm a stepmom, so there was another mother that I had to consider in all of my decisions with Abby, and that was like our number one rule with her, was no matter how much we disagreed with her mom on anything, or we were at odds with her mom on anything, we would never say a bad word about her mother to her,
Mm.
ever, under any circumstances. If she brought up issues that she was frustrated about, we would obviously listen to her,
Mhm.
and we would offer her advice and stuff like that, but we would never say a sideways word about her mom, because that's when you lose her. That's when you lose Abby, right? That's when she becomes defensive of her mother, and that's when she stops listening to you, and that's when she stops wanting to be around you and stuff like
Mhm.
that. So it's really important to be respectful of the other parent.
And that can be
Because,
super duper hard.
yeah. Yes. Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah, parenting is not for the faint of heart. And I mean, Yeah, we basically for 18 years kind of are super responsible for getting these humans to adulthood. Um,
Mhm.
and it's scary when we feel like they're being influenced uh, very negatively.
Yeah.
That's a scary thing.
Mhm.
And at some point, you may be able to talk with them about it when they're old enough. Uh, in the sense of, I want the world to be open to you. I don't want you to be scared of the world. I want the world to be your oyster. And
Mhm.
there are all sorts of different things rather than, because the other parent is, well, don't try this and don't try that. And everything's awful and scary, except what happens inside the church.
Mhm.
So having loving, gentle, respectful, age appropriate conversations with our kids who are really having a tough job navigating when parents have very strong different beliefs. It's different if a parent is nominally religious and one is an atheist. That's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about hardcore religious
Mhm.
people who firmly believe in hell and that anyone who doesn't believe the same as they do is going to hell. And
Yeah,
that's a story
indoctrination.
that it permeates every part of their life. What their child is allowed to wear, watch, read, listen to, who their child is allowed to associate with. There's probably disciplinarian issues that come in with that as well. So let your home be a haven, a safe haven for them
Mhm.
where they can breathe and they
Yeah.
can ask questions and they can be themselves. And sometimes that might mean acting out.
Yeah.
And we never know why kids are acting out. We really have to observe and listen and ask questions as best we can and just be a loving, supportive place for them as much as possible.
Mhm. Simon said, "My kids are 16 years old and 11 years old, and they are secret atheists in the sense
Mm.
that they feel the freedom to express their lack of belief to me as atheist dad." That's what you
Mm.
want to achieve, basically. I mean, obviously, a better way is for them to be able to be open with both their parents and be accepted and supported by both their parents, but if one of them refuses, then
It might not even be safe for them to
yeah.
make that declaration to the other parent. So we always need to keep safety in mind. Simon, I'm so glad that your kids know that they can come to you and talk to you about these issues, which are a pretty big deal.
Yeah, they are. And you mentioned earlier about, like, if the other parent is telling their kids that, um, their non-custodial parent is gonna be going to hell because 'cause they're not religious or whatever. I think a way that you can address that, because that would definitely worry me because I would never want my kids to feel that fear,
To
to
have
grow
that
up with that
burden.
fear.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, so a way that you can kinda poke at that is to just ask them, "Do you ever worry that daddy's gonna go to hell? Or do you ever worry that mommy's gonna go to hell?" Um, and and then tell them that and and that's why you're not afraid, because you don't believe that it's real. It doesn't make sense to me. Um, and also, tell them that you understand why they would be afraid of that because, kids like to be understood. They like to feel like they're understood.
And something that you've often mentioned, Courtney, which I think also really applies in this case, particularly while the children are young, read them stories about creation myths and religious beliefs from different countries, different cultures, different religions, and with the idea that everybody loves stories and religion is another story. And
There's
so this
some
this one is your mom's favorite story or your dad's favorite story, but that can also spark conversations about, well, do we actually believe this is a real thing, or does it sound like maybe it's a story that someone made up?
yeah. And there's some really great books out there by David McAfee. I put links to 2 of them down
Okay.
below. One of them is called The Belief Book, and it's just basically covers, like, some of the different beliefs around the world and stuff like that in just a fun way, and I think, like, you don't even need to ask them if you think that people made it up, because I think by the time you got through a dozen of these stories, they're like, well, they can't all be true. And then you start to see the similarities between them too. And these are the things that triggered the deconversion of so many ex-religious atheists, and like the series that I do on my blog, which people send me stories of how they became an atheist. Like almost every single one of them is, related to either stuff that they read on the internet, or the fact that they were suddenly exposed to other beliefs and suddenly realized, okay, well, these can't all be true. And they're also similar. Like there's another really great book, which is way above kids' age, but it's great for parents if you want to use some of the stuff that you learn in there to talk to kids. But A Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell is just, it's the Jesus story a thousand different ways.
Yeah, his book, actually the video series that I saw with him and Bill Moyers years ago, I think it was called The Power of Myth.
Yeah.
And that was very helpful to me when I was deconverting or deconstructing from my faith, to actually realize, wait, you mean there's other stories about a virgin birth and about a martyred and resurrected savior and all these things that just would indicate that Christianity is, based on myth. It's just recycled mythology. And that was like a slap in the face for me. I had never considered that. I had never heard that because, of course, I grew up in a belief system. And then the people that I surrounded myself with were my echo chamber. They also were in that belief system. And certainly that wasn't something that we were talking about or exploring. And in fact, exploring was bad because doubt is a sin. To doubt is bad. You don't want to be a doubting Thomas. So when you have doubts, they're probably from the enemy or from the devil. And when really doubts are fantastic. Doubts are the seed for growth. Not something to be feared. It just means, I need to learn a bit more.
Yeah, saves you from going to Dealey Plaza and waiting for JFK Jr.
Really, people. And I mean, I have to say that whole crowd looked very white and middle-aged.
Yes, very bored. They're very privileged, bored white people with too many devices in their faces.
Yeah, very weird. And of course, then sunk cost fallacy can play into all this as well. Like I was a very devout Christian for some 40 years.
Yeah.
It was not easy for me to back up or to reevaluate and to reject the beliefs that had comforted me and been part of my life and provided the absolute structure and framework for my life for all those years. And so the deeper people sink into the QAnon stuff, or any of the other conspiracies, whatever, that are floating around today, the deeper they're in it, the harder it is to get them out, and the harder it is for them to admit that they were wrong.
Yeah, I can see that because it's embarrassing and, pride. But also, we also see people who leave cults and become quite vocal about them. So we can hope for some of that to happen. But yeah, with talking to kids about religion, a great place to start is Joseph Campbell, because I just fell in love when I saw that interview, The Power of Myth. I'm not sure if it's still, the full interview is still on YouTube, but it used to be.
Yeah.
That was so good. If you can get your hands on that entire interview, which was filmed at Skywalker Ranch, by the way.
Was it?
Yes.
I didn't know
that. For the nerds out there, it was filmed at Skywalker Ranch. He actually was good friends with why am I forgetting his name?
With that guy?
George Lucas. Why? That's like forgetting Gene Roddenberry.
I mean, come on, no. Talk about sacrilege. Another name people should be familiar with is Dale McGowan, Parenting Beyond Belief. And he has some books and tons of resources, I think, for this situation we're talking about. Parents, trying to co-parent when one parent is a firm believer in something or other, and the other parent isn't. So Dale McGowan's a good resource too.
Yeah. We just got a comment here. Hold on. So Robert said, I just told my daughter when she was 4 that God brutally murdered all the people and animals. She's not religious today.
I don't know that's the tactic.
Take that route. No.
With a sweet little 4-year-old.
Yeah.
But certainly that's a topic to be broached when the kids are old enough that they're not going to be having nightmares.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely wouldn't take that approach. But again, I've never had to deal with any of these issues, so I'm kind of coming at it from an outsider's perspective.
Yeah.
But I've always said that, like consistently since I started doing all of this, that if one of my kids came to me and said that they wanted to go to church or they wanted to explore this religion or that religion, that I would fully support them. And if they were younger, like if they're an adult, there's really not much you can do. Just have conversations with them and hope that one day they realize that it's all a story. But when they're younger kids, if they want to do that, I would always say yes, but my stipulation would be that either I go with you or somebody takes you who I trust to kind of debrief me on what's been said. So I understand what my child has heard and I know what I can counter at home. And again, when you're countering it, don't go at it from an attacking point of view where you're basically telling your kids that this is all a lie and these are stupid stories or whatever. Come at it from a more asking questions, critical thinking angle. Because it's not hard. It is not hard to poke holes in religion.
Right,
It's not
right.
hard at all.
Well, and youth groups are very well funded. They have lots of money, and people are paid full-time as youth pastors to come up with very fun, engaging events to draw kids out. And so humanism is not nearly as well organized as religion, and we really need to step it up. But you could always be the parent to say, oh, so what, youth group is on Friday? Oh, well, on Friday, we were actually going to go mini golfing and have waffles for dinner and, watch a scary movie or whatever. What engaging, exciting thing could you be doing with your kid and their friends?
Mm-hmm. As I've always been a secular parent, an atheist parent, and like both of us have. So we've never sought out community in a church or anything like that. And we've never had trouble finding community elsewhere. I don't know if it's just like where we live, but it's never been a problem. Like we live in a small town, so that in itself is like a secular community. Like some of them are religious, but it's not all the same. And most of us are not. And then we also sent him to a private school. I know that sounds hoity-toity, but it was a nonprofit and the fees were very, very small. But he went to this private school, and that was, in a small town, there was like maybe 15 kids in that whole school. And so it was like a family. It was like a big family. And again, some of the people in it were religious, but most of us were not. And we always had events and stuff like that surrounding the school and fundraisers, and it was that was fun. And then of course, as he got older, he did baseball, and all the baseball families in town know each other, and we had to fight the dog people to save our park from getting turned into a dog park. Despite the fact that we already have tons of dog parks, but that's another story.
And despite the fact that you are a dog person.
Yeah, I'm a dog person, but we already have lots of dog parks.
Yeah.
And then of course there was Cubs, and just there's so many different things that are well, Cubs are secular here in Canada. They have that one little word God in their invocation at the beginning of each meeting, but if you can get over that, everything else is secular. But But there's a ton of ways of finding like secular fun stuff for kids that kind of build community and get them involved in community
Yes.
and meeting friends. Tons of it.
And being the secular parent also really affords us the opportunity to model uh, loving kindness and tolerance, because Christians are very much, we cannot tolerate this and we cannot tolerate that. But you, as the atheist parent, you're not bound by that. You actually can love anyone, and you can tell your children that they can, that they can love anyone as well, and they actually will notice that difference. Because the other parent will have possibly very firm rules around who is safe for them to interact with. And by safe and unsafe, I mean who's religious and who's not religious, with the unsafe person being the not religious person. But you don't have those boundaries. So that's a good opportunity there.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That's the thing. That's the other thing too that parents often forget. And that's something that I myself forgot a lot as my kids were growing up. But kids are a lot smarter than most people give them credit.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take much. Like it doesn't take, that's why I always say like don't get in their face about it. Like don't get confrontational about their beliefs, because it really doesn't take much to especially if they're younger and you keep it up, these conversations about other people's beliefs and the things that you believe and don't believe and stuff like that. There's no way your kid is going to miss the intention there. There's no way your kid is going to miss what you want them to grab from those conversations. They're so smart and they're so moldable. I know that sounds like we're trying to like change them, but we're not. We're trying to protect them, because critical thinking is a defense system. It stops you from going to Dealey Plaza looking for JFK Jr.
I think also you touched on it a bit earlier, asking kids, well, what do you think? Or what would
Yeah.
you like to do? What are your thoughts on it? Really religious parents aren't likely to be asking their children for their children's permission about something like, dear, I was thinking we'd do this. What do you think about it? They're like, I'm the parent and what I say goes, and you're going to have to dance when I say dance. So that also is a very different feeling that can take place in a non-religious home, because the parent isn't so uptight maybe, and not so authoritarian, and so they can ask their kid, oh, what do you think about that, or what would you like to do, and giving their kid, allowing that autonomy is not as fearful when you're not coming from a religious background.
Plus, you promote independence as they get older by asking them to form their own opinions, to choose their own path, to you are promoting an independent person, which by the time they are 19 and 20 is something that you desperately want. Maybe you don't want it when they're 4 or 5, but by the time they are 20 years old, you want them to be independent in some ways.
No, we just had a really interesting comment from Robert. I saw a homeless man set a dumpster on fire when I was 8. I asked him why he did it, and he said Jesus told him to do it. Now that I'm atheist, I think he just wanted to set a dumpster on fire. This is a really interesting vulnerability. Also, we were talking about people are vulnerable. They set reality aside. They embrace fantasy. So they end up going to Dallas expecting to see JFK Jr. there. This is part of that vulnerability too. And I watched a show recently about a family cult, because cults can occur in families too. And the person who had risen to the important rank in the family actually happened to be mentally ill and have a traumatic brain injury. But that in this culture, that didn't matter. He was the man. And so, what's that?
House of Secrets.
House of Secrets. That's it. Yeah. And then because they all listened to him and weren't permitted to doubt him, because he told them all, this is not just coming from me. This is from God. And this is from our dead father, our deceased father. You have to believe me. And they were in a very spiritual environment or nation or whatever, which happens to be India. And so they believed him, and it had disastrous, deadly results. So
Mm-hmm.
we must hold up to scrutiny the things that people tell us. And anyone who says, God told me this or God told me that, is immediately suspect.
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to manipulate you. They may not even know that they're trying to manipulate you, because they may be mentally ill, and they
Mm-hmm.
actually do think that they are hearing these voices that must be Jesus or must be God. I worked at my hospital for years and years transcribing medical reports, including emergency room and psychiatric reports, and religion is terrible when it falls in with schizophrenia or some other types of mental illness. It can have really painful, disastrous results. So we want to be careful about that. And certainly if our kid comes to us and says, so-and-so said God told them blah, blah, we want to talk about that and address that with them, because
Mm-hmm.
it could be dangerous.
Mm-hmm. I just got a comment here. My 5-year-old daughter's with my mom a lot of the time because my husband and I have to work and I can't afford childcare. She already tells me she believes in God and he's real and I should believe in him too. When I try to tell her I don't believe in him, she gets upset. I don't want to straight out say God isn't real, but I don't want her convinced he is. She's too young to make decisions like that. How do you think I should handle this?
I think doing some of the reading that you and I were talking about earlier about
Mhm.
what other religions believe, and just
Mhm.
talking about it being a story could be helpful. What do you think, Courtney?
I think avoid getting her upset by saying that you don't believe in God because you said you are you are upsetting her. So when you upset a kid, they shut down. They stop listening to you, and that's not to say that you should never upset your kids. Like sometimes we have to, right?
Yeah.
Um, but in this situation, it's just a difference of opinions and stuff like that. And when they're so young, like 5 years old is still very young. You have a lot of time to to work with your kid and talk to them about this stuff and educate them and promote critical thought and all of that stuff. Um, so what I would do is ask questions. Just ask questions. Like I said before earlier in the podcast, religion doesn't hold up to the most basic scrutiny. And as she gets older, she's going to start to see that. She may not when she's 5 because, at 5 you're watching Disney movies and you're believing them and you're believing in Santa and lots of things seem totally acceptable to you when you're 5. But as you get older, if you keep having these conversations with her where you're exploring other people's beliefs, like non-Christian beliefs or um, all different types of beliefs from all over the world, or you're asking questions, saying stuff like, oh, that doesn't make any sense to me. How does this work then? And get your kid to try and explain it to you. And eventually they're going to see there's no sense in this. And I wouldn't panic about it right now. Your kid is really young and there you have a lot of time to work with your child on this and to promote critical thinking. There are lots of ways to promote critical thinking too, and like doing science experiments at home. There's so many fun science experiments you can do that gets their curiosity going, and watching science shows as they get older, like Bill Nye the Science Guy or Cosmos, just stuff like that. And don't push it on them. Like with my son, when he first watched Cosmos, it's because I turned it on. I didn't say a word about it. I just put it on the TV. And
Mm-hmm.
naturally, as soon as you say, "Hey, do you want to watch this? Mommy loves this show. Do you want to watch?" Nope. But if you turn it on, if you put it on the TV, they will watch it.
Also, you are allowed to talk to the grandparent and set boundaries there,
Yes.
even though you depend on them for this help to give the child care or whatever. You can definitely make it known to them that you do want them to have some kind of relationship with your grandchild, that you do not want religion to factor in, and that you don't appreciate your daughter being burdened by this and that it's unacceptable to you, and please stop.
Yeah.
That's a conversation you can have.
And Jessica would not follow Robert's advice in the comments. There just no need. There's no need.
No.
Like I said, there's the thing that you rest on is that religion does not hold up to any scrutiny at all. And that's how most of us became atheists. And that's like usually people who are indoctrinated by both parents at home and their grandparents. Those are the harder people to get through to. But your child has you and your husband at home who can actively work with her to teach critical thought and stuff like that. So I wouldn't panic about it now and just be relaxed about it and just push the critical thought and science and all that stuff and make it fun, have fun. The other thing that I would suggest, and this is a little bit sneaky, but if you have a kid who is asking to go to church and like maybe you go with them, you let them explore it or whatever, but then they just want to keep going. What I usually would suggest doing or have suggested before is have a Sunday event that's way more fun than church.
Yep.
And let the kid choose.
Yep. Yeah, I like that idea. I like
You
that
want to go to
idea.
the water park, the
Mhm.
water slides, or church? Do you want to go to the amusement park or church?
You want to go shopping? Yeah. Oh, geez. And it is okay to tell your children in a calm way that people have different things that they believe, and that I actually don't believe that. And that if you're telling them calmly, and it's not in a "you better not believe that" and "grandma's off a rock" or blah blah blah, they might just be surprised and say, "You don't? Why
Yeah.
not, mommy or daddy or whomever?" And yeah, keep it age appropriate. Keep it light as you can. But you're planting seeds, and then the child knows that they can trust you. They're not
Yeah.
going to be, you're not going to be flipping out and freaking out. Yeah. Oh boy, I really feel for you being in that situation. Robert's a
I know.
little extreme. I get the feeling he may be joking.
Yeah, I think he's a bit of a troll. But Jessica also said, "Thank you so much. I just don't want her to feel the guilt I did when I left Christianity. I've tried talking to my mom. She doesn't listen, sadly." Um, so I've had a lot of people also ask me like what to do when in this specific situation when there's a grandparent who is pushing religion on your kids and you don't want that to happen. And I know that you said that she gives you childcare, which you can't otherwise afford, and that is sorry that you're in that
Mm,
situation. But if you
mm.
weren't in that situation, if you had an alternative for childcare, what I would suggest doing in that situation is sitting down with your with the grandparent and saying, "This is the line. You don't cross this line. And if you do, these are the consequences." And make sure that you are very clear about it because a lot of people tend to try and be gentle when they're saying these things to avoid the conflict and like if one of the consequences that you can come up with is that you won't they won't be seeing your child anymore if you can't trust them to follow your rules. It's your child. You are the parent. And sometimes it's difficult to switch the dynamic from them being your parent to you now being in the position of being the parent and you're making
Mhm,
the rules, but you have
mhm.
to. And and it is absolutely well within your right to make rules for your child and sit down with your parent or the grandparent if it's not your parent um, and say, please do not talk to my child about religion. I don't care if
Mhm.
you say that you believe in this, but don't tell them that she should believe in it. Don't tell her about hell, all of that
Yeah,
stuff.
the topics of hell and sin are never to come up. Yeah, because that child is being traumatized
Yes.
in real time when the grandparent is saying those things, and so you're absolutely right. Boundaries setting and boundaries enforcing.
Yeah, and the key to this working is to follow through with the consequences. So, like, obviously, you don't want to lose that relationship in your life. So maybe a consequence could be reduced time with your
That's right.
child.
That's right.
And yeah, and then if they still don't listen, increase the consequences. But the key is you've got to follow through with the consequences, and you have to be clear, crystal clear, so they understand the line and they understand the consequences, and follow through. And
yeah, protecting our children needs to come first. Yep, I
and
agree.
it's important to note in that situation too that it is not your fault. It is theirs.
Yeah.
They, in that situation, they understand where your boundaries are and they understand what the consequences are, and they are still choosing to cross that line. And so they are the ones who are creating the situation. It is not you, and you have nothing to feel guilty about.
Yep. That's exactly right. Wow, this time has just flown by so fast. Wow.
Yeah. I just have to share the last one from Robert there. Consequences can also be some wrestling moves. Yeah, could be. No, it's good to have some comic relief.
Yes,
there.
I was gonna say thanks for providing that comic relief. Jessica, you're welcome. I'm glad you turned in today. Yes, we've heard of Aaron Ra. That's a question from Eric.
He's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, thanks for joining us today. And if you have any questions that you would like, or any topics that you would like us to cover, pop them in the comments, and maybe we'll cover them in an upcoming video. And we should be back next Tuesday at 1 p.m. hopefully. I know it's Wednesday this week, but sometimes things don't work.
Oh well, you gotta roll with it. I'll be back here next week. I know you will be too.
All right. Thanks for joining
Take care,
us,
everyone. Bye-bye.
See ya.